Now let's turn to the Indo-Pacific, where the China Coast Guard says it's expelled a Philippine vessel from waters around Huangyan Dao in the South China Sea, claiming the ship had entered Chinese territorial waters. According to a Coast Guard spokesman, the Philippine vessel, identified as 3006, ignored repeated warnings and attempted to approach the disputed area. The Chinese Coast Guard vessels responded by surrounding the ship and firing a water cannon warning shots to force it to withdraw. The CCG also employed gradually escalating measures, including verbal warnings, tracking, monitoring, and expulsion tactics to expel the Philippine vessel. Spokesperson Liu Dijun stated that all actions taken on site were professional, standardized and legitimate. This comes as the Philippines, Japan and the United States conducted joint Coast Guard exercises off Japan's southwest coast in a show of maritime unity. The drills included search and rescue operations, evacuation simulations and maritime law enforcement drills. They mark the second time the three countries have held coordinated Coast Guard trainings and the first to take place on Japanese territory. Tensions in the South China Sea have escalated in recent months, with China reportedly asserting sweeping claims over the region. China and the Philippines have engaged in months of confrontations in the South China Sea, despite an international ruling that the assertion has no legal basis. Tensions between China and other claimants to parts of the East and South China Seas have also pushed Japan to deepen ties with the Philippines and the United States. We're now joined by Jim Rice, who's a professor of international law, and he's located in Vigan, the Philippines. Jim, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Jim, we see the South China Sea reoccurring, coming up in headlines continuously. If you could explain a little bit about the region, what China claims and what actions does it take when people enter these waters that it claims as its own?
Thanks very much for having me on. I really appreciate this chance to explain to your listeners the degree to which China has inflicted its aggression on the Philippines and on the entire region. You asked about the history. In the late 1940s, China unilaterally declared that essentially the entire South China Sea belongs to China and no other country, regardless of their histories, regardless of their maritime claims and their dependence upon fishing and the region. So China has unilaterally declared this. Meanwhile, other countries such as Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Taiwan have basically been relying on customary international law. Subsequently, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea was entered into and became part of international law, and which, by the way, China signed and ratified, as did the Philippines. And then, of course, China proceeded to break all of the promises and the declarations that they made under the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention. So essentially, what's been happening in the past several years is that the PRC has been plundering the environment, stealing the fish, and banning Filipino fishermen from their own fishing waters in contravention of international law. In 2013, the Philippines brought China before the Permanent Court of Arbitration, claiming that China was in violation of the international law. And the international court ruled in favor of the Philippines. China chose to illegally ignore the ruling. Now, of course, China has stepped up its aggression. And if I can just say, I would object to your use of the term Huangyan Dao, because that's the Chinese term, which is essentially bogus. The international term is Scarborough Shoal. And you shouldn't be buying into Chinese propaganda talking points.
Yes, we will bear that in mind. Jim, you've said that China has ignored international law. Will it face any repercussions for this? Is there possibility for it to face any legal repercussions? And do you see the possibility of this situation escalating? I mean, these water cannons and verbal warnings were used against this Philippine ship. However, do you see in future the possibility of the events turning out in a more severe manner?
Well, they've been doing this for nearly a year. Your question is really good and has got several points. Last year, I believe it was in August, in an attempt by the Philippines Coast Guard to resupply its outpost, they in one of the Philippines shoals, the Chinese illegally and thuggishly attacked the Philippine Coast Guard sailors, wounding several, cutting off a thumb of one of the sailors, and destroying a lot of the equipment owned by the Philippines. As per your other question, which is what can be done about this, under the Biden administration, the United States was engaged in building up a regional alliance of the Philippines, Australia, Japan, and the Philippines in order to band together in order to deter Chinese from further aggression. But this is very serious for us in the region. I live right on the West Philippine Sea. We prefer to call it the West Philippine Sea and not the South China Sea. But regardless of the name, the aggression is very real and the threat is very real.
Yes, Jim Rice, thank you very, very much for your